Why is a fake song going viral? Yes, the I Lost Myself at a P. Diddy Party is an AI generated fake song. But why is it going viral? I'm going to answer that question, kind of talk about the grief of self that Justin Bieber has publicly displayed and how we resonate with that, and how when you listen to a song, it talks to you. And when we heard the lyrics to this song, and I'm guilty of thinking it was real, when we listen to the lyrics of the song, it resonates with us. Why does it resonate? Because maybe it's the drama that we like to participate in, but I think it goes way deeper than that. I think it's a victim standing up in bravery. If you look at the lyrics to the song, it's like he's bravely exposing the evil of someone else. And as if you are a victim, you wish you could do that, or maybe you have done that and you resonate with that. But there's also something about the song that has to do with shame and regret that many of us experience. And Justin Bieber has expressed publicly that there is some shame and regret in his life. If we look at his song Purpose, which we know that he does sing that song, it is on his official YouTube page, he says things like, feeling like I'm breathing my last breath, feeling like I'm walking my last step. Look at all these tears I've wept. So he has publicly told us that he is going through some sort of grief process with his self. Thinking my journey has come to an end, I ask for forgiveness for my sins. So what is there? There's shame, there's regret, there is possible behaviors and choices that he is saying sorry for. And we can all resonate with that. We resonate with kind of these injustices in the victimhood in which we maybe have been a victim. I'm going to talk about grief of self. My name's Christy Bunda-Kamara. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but more importantly, I'm a grief expert. I have experienced every type of grief, and I have learned to process, and I know the how-to. And a grief that we don't often talk about is grief of self. I have personally lost 3 children to death and my husband, but that's not the type of grief I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about grief of self. And that is why this is kind of resonating with people, because Justin Bieber is publicly grieving something that he lost in being, so famous, so young, right? And that's the point of this story, this song. Even though it's fake, there is evidence in some of his other songs that this was a difficult thing, and he's still going through and processing parts of that life, right? That is grief to self. Where are you grieving yourself? Like I said, I've experienced every type of grief, and most recently feeling like grieving that I am no longer a wife because my husband has passed. I'm now classified as a widow, and you have to grieve that. But I want to go further back because I think we all have something in our past that changed us, and we need to grieve ourselves. When I was 14 years old, I was date raped. And how would I define date rape? I was willingly in a situation that I thought was love at 14 years old with an 18-year-old. And I clearly was saying no, and this person did not stop, And that is how I am defining date rape. And in that, and I didn't realize this till many, many years later, I had to grieve something. I had to grieve that I was not technically a virgin anymore. I had to grieve that I wasn't strong enough and brave enough to actually fight and say no. And just had to grieve my view of the world, right? Specifically of men. And I think this happens to all of us in some way, right? And we move on, or maybe we go to counseling, maybe we do some interventions. I did none. I told no one. And I think that happens a lot, right? So what is in your past that you need to grieve? Grieve how it changed you, right? So before that, I thought, you spend time with a man, he, reciprocates the feelings, and you have this romantic love relationship. That's what I believed about a man and a woman. And that one night changed many things about how I think of men, how I think of myself. And we have to grieve that. We can't go back to the ignorance of before, right? Especially if you have been the victim of significant trauma, right? And this is, going back to the theme of this video, of this song that's going viral, and it's not even real, because there are so many people out there who have had early childhood trauma and they want it to stop. It's a horrible injustice and they want it to stop. So how do we work on ourselves in this? I'm going to give you 3 things that if you're still watching, this definitely resonates with you. That there is something in your life that you need to grieve. First is you're going to acknowledge its impact on your life and acknowledge how it changed your story. So let's go back to the 14-year-old me and how this changed my story. And I was so ashamed. And we also see that in the lyrics of the song that's going viral, right? Shame. And we resonate with shame, but it is counterproductive. So I told no one because of my shame, but it changed my future relationships. It changed how I think and enjoy intimacy. That one experience changed those things. And as a 50-plus-year-old adult who was married for 26 years before my husband passed, I have worked through many of those things. And I am fortunate to have a husband who absolutely loved and adored me. But what if you've gone through a series of relationships that fed into the negative thoughts that you started that day of your trauma, right? So the first step is acknowledging the impact that not grieving yourself is having in your life. The second thing is to really be able to organize these things. In my experience, both personally and professionally, grief and trauma get enmeshed with so many other things in our life that we do have control over. And I cannot go back and change time of that 14-year-old girl who, quote unquote, allowed herself to get date raped. And I use quotations because that's the story I tell myself, not that that's the truth. It's the story I tell myself that I allowed it to happen. Okay, that is a negative thought pattern, and that's what I have control over. That's what I can stop. And so when I talk about organizing these things, it's this enmeshment that happens in grief and trauma. Pull those things apart. Now, I have experienced pretty significant trauma in the life of my son and the death of my daughter and multiple other things in my life. So I don't still consider this date rape trauma. But if I was in counseling at like age 20, I would say that was a trauma in my life, right? Because a trauma is something that changes you, changes the way that you see the world, look at the world. And sometimes especially I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, I hear horrible, horrible stories of trauma, victim trauma. And so it's hard for me to say, oh, this was trauma. But if you were to ask the 20-year-old me if that date rape was trauma, absolutely, right? So I need to separate that. That was trauma. I was a victim, also an injustice. But grief of self, grieving that now my view of the world is different. I can't go back to trusting whatever a man says to me and, believing in this, romantic utopia of relationships. I can't go back to that. And when life hits you with things, and it's hitting all of us with things, we are reacting to that. But if we're not organizing it, it's just getting all enmeshed, right? And then new things are happening, and you're just talking negatively about yourself or negatively about the world, how horrible men are, how, if you allow it to fester into other areas, it will impact your journey through life. So I had to grieve myself, and I did this in my early 20s when I was at the point in my life where I wanted to find a husband and I wanted to have true love that lasts a long time. I worked through this date rape at 14, right? But maybe you haven't addressed these things in the past, or maybe you have, but new things keep piling in and it just is too much. So remember, 1 was acknowledging its impact. And number 2 is organizing it and putting it into bite-sized pieces. So grief of self is just part of it. But what about the injustice or the negative self-talk or the spiritual conflict? Not to this date rape, but in my more recent trauma of losing my children, I had really significant spiritual conflict. Like, God, you were supposed to protect me and my children. Addressing that spiritual conflict instead of letting everything turn into negative self-talk. What are the things that started to develop in me in my teenage years? I wasn't pretty enough for that guy to actually like me for who I am, rather than just wanting to conquer or accomplish something. That narrative went on for a long time and impacted other relationships. And I work with tons of women that often that is the narrative that we are telling ourselves, that we're not good enough, that we're not pretty enough, that we're not worthy of a man to love us or someone to love us. And so I talk about this a lot in my videos. These are my courses where the mentally strong method is being able to think through your problems, organize them, and make decisions in line with what you want. I have all kinds of online resources. We have a clinic in Colorado Springs, but also a grief intensive where you can come and really kind of pull those things apart and decide what you need to get better. And then the third thing is finding your purpose. And I'm going to go back to Justin Bieber's song, Purpose. And, I use that as an example of him being open about his shame in his life and some of the hardships that he's gone through. But in this song, Purpose, it addresses spirit. He obviously was going through a spiritual conflict. In this song, he's obviously pursuing a spiritual relationship. And he said, "And you blessed me with the best gift that I've ever known. You give me purpose." And oh boy, does that resonate with me. My book is called Pain and Purpose, Turning My Pain into Purpose. Helping you along your journey is helping me along my journey. That's my purpose. My purpose is to go along this journey publicly, and that helps me and it helps you. You give me purpose every day. You give me purpose in every way. It also, some of the lyrics of this song also talk about some of the injustice and the negative self-talk. And he says, we weren't necessarily put in the best position to make the best decision. So and this is, we call it behaviors and choices. Like oftentimes you make decisions after being a victim that then bring you shame of your own decisions. Many people who are addicted to drugs or in the sex work industry have sexual trauma. We say the gateway to drugs is trauma. It's not a drug, right? It is escapism to oftentimes early childhood trauma. And we see this in addiction, and we see this in people who are choosing to use themselves sexually not everyone, I'm not passing a judgment. I'm just saying that you might be ashamed of some of your choices. And so therefore, no longer think of yourself as a victim. And going back to knowledge what part you need to grieve of yourself, how that changed you. But then when we get to the organize, we're putting behaviors and choices in a different category. If you're choosing to do something right now that you are ashamed of, that is your choice. And yes, it could have to do with the past grief that you have not, grief and trauma that you have not processed. But that second step is organizing those things. And then the third step is finding that purpose. Musicians get to use music to tell their story and to find their purpose. Artists use art. I'm using my story. But what is your purpose? And how do you find that? And it doesn't have to be some big grand thing like Justin Bieber's purpose is to, share his music, and mine is to share my story. Yours could be to make the best life for your child, to be the best significant other, to be the best teacher or nurse. I don't know your story, but I do know that you have a purpose. And so, acknowledge where you need to grieve yourself, organize those thoughts, and find purpose. I have 3 questions that came in kind of about this topic. And the first one shares a pretty elaborate story of being a victim for a long period of time of sexual abuse by her father, her stepfather. And then she left home fairly early and got into a pretty significantly abusive relationship and very sexually charged and perverted in this kind of toxic relationship, right? And she was in this relationship for a long time. Her question is really separating the trauma and the victimhood versus the guilt of choices and then personal growth now. And she kind of shared that there was some sexual perversion that she actually enjoyed and then felt guilty for that enjoyment of that. She is now in a safe relationship and still struggling with those things, right? It's impacting her now healthy relationship. And it goes back to that organizing. Obviously, if you're asking this question, you have acknowledged it. Sounds like you're trying to organize it because you can see where you're a victim and you can see where you made choices. And I guess your question is really about the shame and guilt. Shame goes into the category of negative self-talk. You have to let it go. You have to acknowledge what got you to the point and then deciding today, is that something that you want to be a part of or not a part of? And it sounds like you're saying you don't want to be a part of it. And so being able to let go of shame and how you talk to yourself, right? Because it's really the narrative that you're saying in your brain. So I want you to come up with at least 5 positive affirmations about you sexually. I am a beautiful, sexy woman. I don't know, like that feels good and real and that you wouldn't be ashamed of. But it sounds like you're doing the work and your next step is, bringing that all together and finding your purpose. The second question is, this really resonated with me, but I can't do this right now. Every time I think about opening up these boxes of things that I've experienced in my past, I can't. Well, I can't is a negative thought and a choice, right? And sometimes that choice is legitimate. I'm not saying you have to deal with all of your problems all the time. But if you do not work on your mental health, it will come out in other ways. It will come out in a mental health diagnosis, depression, anxiety. It will come out, if that's not treated and dealt with, it will come out in even physical forms. Pain, autoimmune disease, even cancers have been linked back to just this overwhelming stress over a long period of time. So I do challenge you to do something. Find little pieces that you can do. There's like trauma therapy specialists that do this thing called EMDR that like open up all these boxes and help work through that trauma. It could take a year, and it's not always the right time. So I'm not saying you have to dive in deep, but start with the negative talk. Start with the way that you talk about yourself and separate that from the other categories, right? Because the way that you talk to yourself, your brain and your body believes is true. And just working on those affirmations every day, and at some point deciding what you need to do for your grief and trauma. And then the last question is, I'm currently seeing a counselor and we're working through my past trauma. I like what you're saying. How can I get my counselor to kind of incorporate this? Well, all counselors are trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's what the Mentally Strong method is. And so you can just kind of have that conversation about, I want to work specifically in cognitive behavioral therapy, know what I'm doing, why I'm choosing it. You could also take the Mentally Strong Method online course, and that will, you can teach it, and then it has homework, and you can take your homework in to your counseling appointment. So, yes, keep working with your counselor. I have lots of resources. Give us your email. We'll make sure that you get all of that information. And if you like when I go over songs and stuff, I also went over I Am Not Okay by Jelly Roll. So watch that next.